Well, folks, moments after we recorded the episode you're about to listen to, Alex and I and our production team were hit with horrific news that Charlie Kirk had been assassinated. And I know, Alex, when we heard, we were still on the Zoom together and just, stunned. We're just all hit really hard by it. What were you thinking in that moment?
If you were there, it was like 20 seconds of just like no one was saying anything. And the one thing is, he's, regardless of how you feel about his politics, guy's got kids, he's got a family, and your heart goes out to them. You say a prayer for the family, but it really, really stunning that this is still happening today in America.
From Alex, in my perspective, we probably disagreed with 99.9% of the things that Charlie Kirk said and stood for. But violence is not the answer, never should be, and should be condemned by everybody. You'd hope that would emanate from the highest office in the land, with something more like the words that Robert Kennedy spoke after the assassination of Martin Luther King, when he said, what we need in the United States is not division. What we need in the United States is not hatred. What we need in the United States is not violence or lawlessness, but love and wisdom and compassion towards one another. I hope you'll listen to the rest of the episode. Please remember. And, it's one of the things we try to do on this show. I'm not saying I don't always go into a heavy rant, but we try to do these shows with respect and civility. And I think, it says us. It's obviously a social network that's designed to build civility and trust and community, unlike the other stuff that's spewed on X and other places. But let's strive for that, and I hope you'll enjoy the rest of the episode. Thanks all. Hey everybody, it's Joe Trippi, and welcome back to That Trippi Show with my co-host Alex Shashlo. He's back, folks. This week, a ton to get into. I keep saying it, we have to fight everywhere. Trump's MO is to throw so much at the wall and hope it sticks. And the fascist MO is to tire you, the resistance, out. From a tax on labor to a long-term plan to never give back control. We have to fight on so many fronts. To talk about some of them, including some battles you might not even know are going on, we thought we'd bring back our good friend, Mike Podhorzer. You know Mike by now, and we'll link to his latest post that really got us thinking in the show notes, but it's a must read. Welcome back, Mike.
Thank you. It's great to see you all again.
Alex, where do you want to get started, my friend?
Thanks, Trippi, for filling in last week. It's weird. We got a bunch of emails from listeners saying this was one of their favorite shows. I'm trying not to take it personally, but he can have it. So, Mike, we started talking pre-show a little bit, but one of the reasons we wanted to talk to you is there is a battle that is not anywhere near the front pages right now that Trump is kind of waging war on. I would certainly call an American institution, something that near and dear to your heart. But I wanted to talk about what that Trump versus, I don't want to call it Trump versus labor battle, but that's basically what it is. Tell our listeners what's going on there.
Sure. So probably people who are listening to this are already pretty well educated about what authoritarians do once they get into office in terms of consolidating power. And we've had good reporting about some of the pages in the playbook, like you intimidate the media, you go after the law firms, you go after the judiciary, all of those things. And fighting back, as Joe was saying, on all those fronts is really important because we can't lose any more ground than we have to. But it has also been a first page checkbox to take out the labor movement. Most people are familiar with that. saying from the Nazi era, first they came for and then they came for me, and there was no one to protect me. And at the top of that list was first they came for the unions. And the reason it's so important for authoritarians to take out the unions is that it is institutionalized collective power. It is what can actually act in society in a resourced, coordinated way. It is a group of people who have courage in each other. And if you think about where authoritarians have been beaten, the Solidarity movement in Poland actually getting to Soviet totalitarianism, the copper miners that brought the ANC back in South Africa, Lula, who actually became president in Brazil after getting rid of it, right? When you take out the labor movement, you have a society that's just individuals who by themselves don't have enough power and are often too afraid to take the steps that are necessary. So, unfortunately, in the United States, the labor movement really has sort of been ghosted by the Democratic Party and by many progressives. And that's a big problem, because what that means is that people just don't understand how important the attacks I'm about to talk about are. Now, the other reason why Trump and the MAGA folks are going after us is that it has been the ambition of the billionaires, the Kochs, everybody like that, to basically wipe unions out because of their own profit interest, right? So right now, these are the things that are ongoing. The Trump canceled the collective bargaining agreements with almost all the federal unions. That amounts to literally the largest act of strike breaking in American history, not just like federal government, anywhere, right? People probably have heard of PATCO and what Reagan did. That was 11,000 air traffic controllers. This is 750,000 people who are just like who he's taking their union away from. He has basically decapitated the NLRB, which is the agency that was set up to protect unions and beyond that, people's rights in the workplace. And Elon Musk, through SpaceX, has brought a suit to say that the whole idea of the NLRB is unconstitutional. And for court followers, it won't surprise you that the Fifth Circuit, the one that does all the crazy ass things, has agreed with them that it's unconstitutional, which basically means that there's that going after employers for what are called unfair labor practices would be off the table. So this is code red. It's not getting anywhere near enough attention. And that's why I'm grateful to be on, because I think people need to understand not just that this is something that Trump is doing to another group of people. It's something that if he succeeds means we all have less chance of winning this in the end.
Can the unions themselves fight this? I mean, don't they need all of us, right? But I'm just trying to get a sense for what.
Oh no, and there's a lot going on for sure. There's a lot going on, but it has always been the case that the success of working people at times like this depends on solidarity with people who are not themselves in unions, right? Many people here probably have heard of like the Flint sit-down strikes for GM in the 30s, which are one of the sort of most famous strikes, right? Where the people at GM who had not yet been, GM had not yet recognized the union, just stayed at their places. But what is obvious as soon as I'm about to say it, but no one really connects with, is it was a successful strike because the people in the neighborhood were bringing them food every day. And they were standing in front of the gates to make sure that the hired goons couldn't get into the facility, right? So people have to understand that, yes, we need to do, like, we are very much gearing up for this fight, but its success depends on everybody else realizing in time that it's their fight too.
It does seem like and when Trippi's been on lately, and not the last episode, but before, he does talk about how something in the authoritarian playbook is essentially to isolate as many groups as possible so that the left hand doesn't know what's happening to the right hand. But with unions, and it really does feel like it's more than that.
Oh, it's way more than that, because the thing that for people who are not in unions that is distinctive, as opposed to pretty much any other progressive organization out there, is that we are self-financing, right? People pay dues. And so we're not dependent, like Trump can actually cut off our funding, for example. And we're not at the whim of a foundation. In fact, it's illegal for us to take money from anyone but our members, right? And so that solid support is crucial. And what, again, people who are listening, watching, who've been in unions this will resonate with. But if you haven't, remember that if you're in a union, you're not just getting the benefits of it, you're also being trained as an active citizen, in the sense that, like, if you work at, say, a non-union grocery store, you just show up and you get your hours and pay, and that's like you have no control over your life. If you work at a unionized grocery store, then not only do you have a set wage and know what your hours are going to be, but you have worked with your fellow workers to negotiate for the contract that got you that. And that turns people from being passive into understanding how to act together and how to get things done and how to, like, have the courage to do what we unfortunately may have to do in not too long if these things keep escalating now.
So how can people engage and help if they're not members of a union?
Well, right now, I think that it's like beginning to talk about it, educate right. I mean, it needs to start percolating up to people so that we're not flat-footed when the first crisis happens, right? There isn't a thing to do when this airs that is direct yet, but there's a lot of education that has to happen before that, because there will be a crisis.
And talking about fronts, your latest weekend reading, Monsters and Their Enablers, frames the battle we're in so well. And it really, I just actually read it right before we came on. I wanted to spend some time on it. I think it is a must read. We will put it in the show notes and urge everybody to read Michael's post.
Let's get into it. I mean, Mike, you have a tendency to kind of make a pretty bold statement and then footnote the hell out of it, which we really appreciate. Like actually, if you read the piece, there's a couple, like I write too. Your footnotes are often longer than like a whole piece from me or from Joe.
Well, he does warn people that this is going to be a long piece, but it's well worth reading every word and every footnote.
Well, the reason, just to be clear, the reason I do it is because, for the most part, what I'm saying is not what people are used to hearing. And for people who are thoughtful, I want to walk people through to show that this isn't just rhetoric, right? That, in fact, if you really look into what's going on, this is pretty persuasive.
I mean, starting, one of the things, I just really liked how you frame this. And one of the things we get into on the show a lot is what kind of the conventional thinking, the conventional wisdom is getting wrong. And one of the things you describe Republican Party, or what's left of it today, is kind of, you say it's the political agent of what you call a Neo-Confederacy. And what do you think that, like, first of all, why are you framing it that way? But what does that get that the kind of red versus blue traditional idea misses.
And I think I'm glad you're starting there, because I think this is one of the most, the biggest piece of misdirection in the way we talk about politics, right? Because we look at what's going on as if there's a free-floating, independent agency, can do whatever it wants, Democratic and Republican Party that's out there trying to get votes from this or that group. And what's missing, and this is going to be tomorrow's piece, is that about 100 years ago, Scott John Dewey said that, that politics is the shadow that big business casts on society. And the parties are the shadow, and we're not paying attention to the shadow casters, right? We're not paying attention to the people the interests that are responsible for this set of people being in office for the Republican Party, right? And every time, right, they do something that seems so unpopular, for example, we think, God, why would they do that? Like they could get more votes if they do X or Y. But they're not there to win votes. They're there to accomplish the agenda of the interests that put them there. And primarily, it's a coalition of white Christian nationalists that are grounded in institutional evangelical churches in the South, and in the plutocrats who are mostly from extractive industries or inherited wealth, think Kochs or others like that. And it's the same set of folks that go back all the way to the founding of this country. But because we keep thinking that there's just America, and like we can't even get our public polls to break it out by region, for God's sake, right? If we did, right, you would see how, especially, and basically with the exception of this brief period from sort of World War II through the end of the Cold War, that and sort of breaking up with the Voting Rights Act, that the South has insulated itself from the America that we think defines all of us. But they never bought into this, right? And so you have this group of interests that on the economic side never accepted the idea of the New Deal, of unions, of Social Security, of anything but the most voracious laissez-faire capitalism. And you have this group of increasingly marginalized white Christian nationalists. And neither of them were gaining traction. They were receding, right? If you think about the moment Barack Obama was inaugurated, this is not the future you were thinking about if you were freezing your butt off at his first inauguration. That, a dozen years later, Donald Trump would be president and there'd be a military occupation, right? And that they'd be taking slavery out of the Smithsonian. Right. So how did that happen? It isn't because Democrats got it wrong on messaging. It's because this coalition understood that in order to regain power, they couldn't do it through small d democratic avenues, right? You can imagine going to Congress with a bill that said billionaires should be able to spend as much money in politics as they want, or politicians should be able to draw whatever lines they want, or let's get rid of the Voting Rights Act, right? Not going to happen. And yet it all happened because they understood taking over the Supreme Court was the first step. And that if they could get a majority, they could just by their fiat completely change the balance of power in this country. And that's what's happened, right? And that is just not part of the radar if all you're paying attention to is what Chuck Schumer or Mike Johnson is saying and what the latest message guru is saying, right? And so it ended up, and these are the enablers in today's thing, it ended up, it didn't have to happen. We had enough power for years to have pushed back on this, but it was sort of denying that it even existed, and even to this day that it's really existing.
Yeah, I remember, Alex, you may remember too, when we actually were talking about branding. This is a I don't think we had said Neo-Confederacy, but Confederacy. And actually, it's why our friend Reed Gallon, and at the time we launched what we called the Union, because we were trying to get the pro-democracy people who wanted to fight this to join the Union. And there was a lot of confusion at the time when Reed launched it about, were you talking about joining a union, or was it the Union? That's how like the difference in thinking is, that that was confusing to people. But Reed's still out there, and I think he's got thousands of people who've joined it. And I think it's really important to start seeing it in the way you framed it, because we were thinking about it that way a few years ago when we helped him launch that thing.
Yeah, and I think an essential like deepening of that insight that's really important that just isn't talked about, but it's what makes it, should sort of let the light bulb go on, is that it isn't that there are, people in pickups waving Confederate flags. It's that the nature of our federalist system and the way we do elections gives what is a minority, very small minority, the ability to do this, is that they're concentrated, right? And probably not in places where people who read the New York Times live, right? But so, for example, white evangelicals are only 18% of the country, but they are half of the primary electorate of almost every Republican representative in the country. And so if you ask yourself, like, how is Mike Johnson, the Scott right, surviving as speaker when these other people didn't? Because he's from that community, right? And so are the rest of them. That's why they talk that way. And that's what, right? But if you can be half or more of the primary electorate in like 80% of the Republican districts, that's different from thinking what I'm talking about is there are too many people who watch the Dukes of Hazzard or something, right? Right. I mean, it's not that it would have, like, the neo-Confederate idea would have no traction if we had national elections.
Right.
So, Mike, one of the things, and this again, glad you're on now, because this really hits on a lot of things we Joe and I have been talking about too, and a lot of our guests. But we tend to think that Democratic Party tends to think of like elections solve everything, and like you got to just organize and win in November, and maybe parachute in October, or even radical thought, maybe September, just knock a bunch of doors and try to win. But one of the things that kind of the problem there is that everything else institutionally, there's often this like paralysis or this hope that the election will fix everything. I mean, you're kind of more direct about it, talking about how when some of these big existential threats that you defined in your piece were rearing their heads, Democrats, when they had the chance, but the institutions, I think my take is that they put too much faith in elections, but generally speaking, they have failed to act. So what do we have to do rather than just kind of pouring gasoline on this fire? What do we have to do to start getting at least a mindset shift, or start realizing that there are a lot of fights every day we got to have?
Oh, absolutely. There are fights you have to have, but I think we also have to understand that while there are some members, Democratic electeds, like say a Jamie Raskin, who is great and is like fighting the fight, that we're not going to succeed eventually with these leaders, right? That like this is a moment when like new leadership's necessary, and where the people with a very different perspective and with a base outside of the sort of business community that most of the members of Congress have right now are going to be necessary to break this. I mean, I want to give you a sort of point of comparison that I hope people don't just come in midway and think I'm crazy. But if you think about this neo-Confederate coalition, if you think about MAGA or how the Tea Party, whatever, for a long time, they looked at the Republican Party and were really disappointed in it, right? And they would try to convince the Republican leadership, whether it was Boehner or Ryan or any of those people, to take their agenda seriously. And everything changed when they basically replaced them all, right? They're like, you can't convince, it's never happened, you can't convince a leadership to do something different that's that radical, right? It only happens through replacement, right? If you think about the Democratic, like getting more for people our age, if you think about what the Watergate class meant, right? They came in a way that was necessary in 2021 at the latest, and they passed the FEC Act to control, they like started going right after all the things that came out of Watergate and created an independent Justice Department, an independent FBI, and like all of the things that we're defending now, but it wasn't the people who were the leadership of the Democratic Party.
No, I mean, that's clearly the case. I mean, that you see, you need a changing of the guard. I mean, because that part of it too is the way parties, on both parties, the way you go up through leadership, it's kind of like, by the time you get there, by the time you get to be the leader, you've mastered that thing of just making sure everything's safe and everything's moving forward slowly in a way that's not going to upset some of your members. And so it's the absolute opposite of what we need right now in the party and in our institutions.
Well, it's even beyond that in a way with the party structure. I mean, the incentives are completely misaligned for anything other than defending the status quo, which again is a trap I think a lot of Democrats fell into last year.
But also, by the way, it's not just leadership; it's the consulting class.
Oh, that's the worst.
It's just I mean that. You can't keep doing the same argument over and over again, or actually, sort of camouflaging the argument. This is time for really putting a stake in the ground and fighting. And it's not the next election. It's now. So they're probably counseling a lot of people in office. Keep your head down. I mean, it's the exact opposite of what we need. That's why, Gavin Newsom, Pritzker, et cetera. I mean, there are people starting to stand up, but we need the entire party, and not just the party, but independents, others out there to stand up and be there in this fight.
What really gets me is when you're up against somebody, and again, I mean, we talked to some of the people that spent a lot of time with Steve Bannon, some of his biographers, people that helped this book. And he is very much a burn it down and sift through the ashes guy. The problem is the knee-jerk response was save it, not fix it, save it. And we got into the whole save it thing last time and clearly did not work. So anyway, Mike, we're actually starting to get close on time here, but wanted to broaden it a little bit. One of the phrases you used, and this gets to what we were just talking about, paved roads inevitably lead to dead ends. And you've been calling for the same thing we've been calling for, which is essentially a new map to look at. Not new maps, by the way, not the last couple of weeks, but where are we going from this? I mean, how do we start? Because again, we're so used to this idea that like you vote tomorrow and it changes everything and everything's back to normal. That's not the world we're in.
Yeah, it's basically, because that was a pretty brief version of it, but basically it's like we keep like having the same driver who's looking at the same map, and we never get to the destination we want to get to. And the only thing we can't question is the driver or the map he's looking at, right? Instead, it was like, oh, we missed a sign over there. Or, right. But no one questions the map. No one questions that person should be the driver. Right. And so, and that's not a bug. That's a feature. All the paved roads right now lead to dead ends. Right. And that should really, before it's too late, tell us we have to find maps that actually describe the terrain we're driving through, right? So that we can get to a good place. And that's what, like, the weekend reading you're talking about is beginning to do. There'll be a bunch more over the next couple of weeks that fill out the idea of what this map should look like.
And what about, just before we go, what's your take on media's role in all of this? And
it's horrible. I mean, it is among the most consequential reasons why we're in this, because in order to make a change a map, in order to get everyone on the same page about what's actually happening, like, we all have to believe the same thing. And our corporate media keeps doubting and knocking down people who are skeptical of the leadership, right? Even when Biden would start to try to do the right thing, the New York Times would be out there finding some misstatement he made, or, both sidesing, right? You don't see that on the other side, right? You need, like, everyone, like the people, and this is where I think our side really just can't see, like, how what's happening with in their world, right? The January 6th rioters are sons of liberty, right? They tell a coherent story that keeps going, right? It's why Trump, it isn't like some narcissistic defect alone. It's that he has to stay in character. He has to stay in this role. Right. And so it makes sense but he couldn't pull it off if Fox and the whole media ecosystem wasn't agreeing that they're the sons of liberty. Right. And on our side, and so people just don't know what to do.
Well, Joe, I don't know if you've got anything else for Mike. And again, Mike, ultimately, we're probably going to have you on a couple more times in the next year or so, like we've been doing.
No, if you're going to have weekend readings that come out, we're putting it in the show notes. People should check it out. And if you're going to continue to put these out with more of, because we talked a lot about the problem today, but the road to what the new maps should look like. And we're not talking about districts here, folks, but and how we get more people on those maps and pushing in the right direction. Mike's someone I'm really looking forward to hearing more from on that, because I think we need solutions, and also how we come to the aid of the unions when this fight reaches them in a more direct way. So thanks, Mike, for coming on.
Thank you.
And thanks everyone for listening to That Trippi Show. Make sure you join us at sez.us. It's a civil social network for real human beings, where we're building a pro-democracy network that builds civility and trust. This podcast will always be free and is part of Lincoln Square. Check out the latest at lincolnsquare.media. And if you're listening to this episode on YouTube, please like and subscribe to get alerts when we post the next episode. You can always send us a question to thattrippishow@gmail.com, or leave us a question and review on iTunes. I hope we get some questions about this episode that we can talk about next week. So we'll see you then. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you. Thank you.